In a world full of spaceships and magical gods, one man challenges all, armed with only the power of... birds? Isles of the Emberdark is finally out. That's something that I would say if I had made this video on time. It's been something of a trip to make this. I originally intended to do a full book review since this is the first Cosmere novel to release since I started doing Truth Watcher Corner. I even made a short unboxing video back when I first got it at the end of August. Then, I kinda kept getting distracted with the need to cover other things, and now it's December and I haven't talked about it, which I still want to do.
About damn time.
I've read this book all the way through nearly 3 times now, and honestly the time has long passed for me to do an actual book review of it. However, something that I can do is make a video where I break down all the biggest and most important implications that this book has for the Cosmere at large. This book changes nearly everything we understand about the Cosmere. Science, technology, interplanetary relationships, economics, and even the individual lives of some of our favorite characters are thrown into disarray by some of the information that we learn in this book. This is likely the single most interconnected Cosmere novel to date. Whether you just finished your first read or you're rounding out your 5th, join me today as we dissect the secrets within Isles of the Emberdark here on Truth Watcher Corner. The first thing we need to discuss is the greater Cosmere timeline and where exactly Emberdark takes place on it. Luckily, Isles of the Emberdark makes that really easy. The original Sixth of the Dusk, the novella that the book is based on, was always set very late in the timeline. But now we know that, definitively, this is the last book in the series. Okay, technically speaking, Sunlit Man might take place later, but I saw no solid evidence that would put it before or after Emberdark, so we're going with before. Prior to the release of this book, our last definitive book was actually Tress of the Emerald Sea, and we know that this book takes place after that, because Captain Crow is in this book. Remember her? She was one of the 2 main antagonists of Tress of the Emerald Sea. At the end of that book, she got sold into slavery to a dragon named Zixus, who is also in this book, bossing around Crow. Listen, it isn't exactly a hidden detail, but we do need to point it out. The important takeaway from Emberdark's place on the timeline is what the events of this book mean for our favorite worlds. Some of these are actually kind of depressing when we look at it. Emberdark makes it pretty clear that the Cosmere is on a bit of a razor's edge. The planets of Scadrial and Roshar have emerged as the dominant geopolitical powers in the universe, and they don't seem to like each other very much. That would actually be a good sign. Last we saw these 2 powers, Roshar had been taken over by an unholy fusion of the God of Honor and the God of Hatred, turning the Mad King Taravangian into the God of Retribution. Meanwhile, Scadrial barely fended off the predations of the God of Autonomy, leaving Harmony free to begin a big bout of diplomacy and exploration. One would hope that would leave Scadrial to become our primary good guys, but as Emberdark shows us, the Malwish are the primary government of Scadrial, which isn't necessarily a good thing. The Malwish appear to be extremely militaristic, expansionist, and borderline fascist, which is not what you really want to hear. Now the 2 powers, Scadrial and Roshar, are apparently locked in some sort of magical space Cold War, and are only held back from straight up military conquest by fear of reprisal from other shards. Why Harmony would be so cool with Scadrial acting this way, I do not know. We will simply have to wait for Mistborn Era 3 for any sort of explanation on that.
First, Ghost Bloods. We are at Bing 81%. So, moving toward the ending of that.
The timeline isn't the only part of Emberdark. We also have a lot of information about planets, principalities, and peoples in the Cosmere, much of which is actually brand new to us. For example, this is our first true look at the city-state of Silverlight. We've heard this name a bunch over the years, but we haven't actually gotten to see the city until now. Silverlight, as a reminder, is a city located entirely within the cognitive realm. This version we see is a rather vast metropolis, with magical dragon steel skyscrapers that apparently house a wide variety of dragons, which is really interesting. I'll discuss dragons in a bit though, because we learn a lot about them after decades of mystery. Silverlight, to finish the thought though, seems to be something of a Switzerland meets New York City type of locale when it comes to the greater Cosmere. They appear to stay neutral in the battle between the two great powers, but they also have a massive amount of people, products, information, and money flowing through the place. And the whole thing is built on top of a giant natural perpendicularity, which would probably have to be in order to have a stable civilization inside the cognitive realm. It's also unique amongst perpendicularities. The average perpendicularity takes people from one specific place in the physical realm to one specific place in the cognitive realm. Silverlight is unique because it can actually connect to 3 different places in the physical realm, one of which is of great import because it's the planet of Yolin, which is not only the homeworld of the dragons, it's also the homeworld of the entire Cosmere. It's where all people came from and all the shards. Apparently travel to and from Yolin is highly restricted, which is something we never knew until now. With a connection that important, it really makes me curious where exactly the other 2 places Silverlight can access are. One final note on Silverlight is that its perpendicularity is so vast that it actually dilates time. 1 day in Silverlight is 10 days outside of it. Another place that Emberdark gives us a lot of information on is Threnody. The planet was the setting of Shadows for Silence, and was also the place where Odium murdered the god of ambition. This created a massive explosion of investiture that has left the place barely alive, and now we know a bit more about what exactly that means. It has been known for years that Threnody is home to an entity known as the Evil, which has devastated the populace for generations, forcing them into the hostile outskirts of the planet. We now know that the Evil is not one entity, but several, a whole kind of subspecies of sort, composed entirely of anti-investiture, which was discovered in Stormlight Book 4, Rhythm of War. Mixing anti-investiture with regular investiture causes a massive explosion, and because all people naturally have a small amount of investiture inside their very souls, it's probably a good idea to stay away from these giant eldritch nightmares. The Evil are also known as Type 14 Threnodite entities, or Nephilim, or Idolith. Those 2 additional names are pretty important, because they're actually real things that exist in our real world, kind of. Nephilim are mentioned in the Bible as a race of giants, or fallen angels, or possibly just the offspring of ordinary men who have fallen away from the covenants with God made by their parents. Believe it or not, people disagree on what they should be interpreted as. Idolith, meanwhile, seems to be a reference to Final Fantasy, which Brandon Sanderson is a huge fan of. It's probably also a reference to Eidolon, which Final Fantasy based their Idolith on. In Greek mythology, Eidolon are a spirit image of a living or dead person, essentially just a kind of shade. Speaking of shades, when a Threnodite human dies, they have a chance of coming back as a shade, a form of cognitive shadow that is usually a hostile monster that withers anything it touches. Their withering might work on the same anti-investiture principles, but we aren't entirely sure about that. I'm admitting that's just speculation on my part. We have one sapient shade in Emberdark, which are actually pretty rare, and it's actually Naz, who was a background character in a lot of the Cosmere, helping Chrysala with her research. He appeared in the flesh during Mistborn's secret history, and is responsible for a lot of maps and drawings in the Stormlight archive. Somehow, he died between books and became indebted to Zixis, which I will certainly be interested in learning how exactly that happened. There are a few other locales that are worthy of mention in slightly less detail. Lumar, the planet Tress takes place on, has become an increasingly important stop in the Cosmere, as the aether spores there are abundant, and those things are pretty important to running spaceships. I'm still wrapping my head around exactly how these machines work, but the aether is a very important part.
Slaved into the primary Heisenfram terminal. Now, you do know what a bilateral cololateral is.
Well, of course I do, human.
Speaking of aethers, we learn a bit more about their homeworld of Daharti. We had previously learned that it was uninhabitable by aether-bound people, after some sort of entity dubbed Dark Aether had invaded it. We don't know if that situation was ever resolved, but we do know that it used to have a perpendicularity, but no longer has one, which makes traveling to it quite difficult, as you can't use the cognitive realm as a shortcut. We also learned that aethers bound to people can die, which isn't fatal to the host, but it is considered pretty bad luck. You can see there our resident engineer, Aditil. I really hope I'm pronouncing these names right.
Dimomo.
Right. What did he say?
Zitzi, the pilot on Starling's crew, is a new subspecies of humanity in the Cosmere called a Lanark. They are essentially just humans who have feathers instead of hair, and might have some form of electro and or technokinesis, given how Zitzi operates the dynamics controls. He is also from a place where everyone lives in a structure called the Great Apparatus, which constantly moves rooms about as the inhabitants require them. It is the first known location that the Shard of Invention is known to have an impact on, likely either designing or inspiring the apparatus, seeing as it's not even a planet, but rather a planetary megastructure similar to something like the Death Star.
That's no moon. It's a space station.
It's too big to be a space station.
I also want to make one more mention of Scadrial. The Malwish appear to have dominion over the planet, and as mentioned, are increasingly expansionistic and militaristic. However, I do want to point out that one of the main threats to our antagonist in this book, Colonel Deja, was losing too many soldiers, as only 6 deaths could cancel his entire operation. That might seem like a lot of people, but I know what Scadrians are capable of, and a loss of life in the single digits stopping a plan of this size and scope, that's definitely not common. It isn't much to go on, but maybe there's still a kernel of goodness to the general Scadrial population.
Nicholas! Two already!
I'm on 17!
I have no pointy yet outscoring me!
One thing many people are likely wondering about the Cosmere of this time is what it means for our favorite characters and people. And we learned a lot of fascinating aspects about some characters and even species that will be pretty important to remember about the Cosmere as we go forward. For starters, dragons.
And then the dragons arrived.
We have known dragons have existed in the Cosmere for a long time now. Since 2009 to be exact, as the first time Brandon ever mentioned them was an internet post from way back before anyone even considered calling it anything other than Twitter. However, we have heard only small bits and pieces of information about them over the years. We know they were from Yolen, original home of civilization in the Cosmere, and that they were worshipped as something like gods, and a few other things. But Emberdark really nails down some details. Some of these we had heard before, but this is the first time we get some hard confirmations from reliable sources. Brandon seems to take inspiration from his dragons from no singular source. There are elements of Western and Eastern dragons and their designs and powers, which I think is really nice. Dragons in the Cosmere are shapeshifters, capable of changing back and forth between humanoid and draconic forms. We don't know if they can change into any more forms and how much specific control they have over the forms they take, but they can change freely between the two. Their dragon forms incorporate dragon steel into their bodies, but no canon source has ever told us what exactly this mystical metal is capable of, nor if it only occurs in dragons or can be mined in other ways. Emberdark shows us that dragon young, called dragonettes, are locked in humanoid form for the first 30 years of life, which is actually a pretty short time in the lifespan of a dragon, even if the child might not think so. Dragons have a massive amount of knowledge and skill with investiture that no other species naturally has. Their bodies are capable of absorbing investiture directly from the spiritual realm, and even metabolizing it into nutrients and water, meaning they have few actual physical needs. They don't even need to sleep if they do not want to. They are virtually indestructible as well, as the ability to draw investiture makes them heal from virtually any damage and makes them immune to poison and disease. Most curious is a bone they all have called a tamukek. This is an item that was first mentioned in the non-canon unpublished drafts of the Lyre of Partenel, a book that we have never seen in its entirety, as well as in Dragonsteel Prime, a non-canon prequel novel to the entire Cosmere that Brandon first wrote for his bachelor's degree thesis. The tamukek allows a dragon to connect either with their followers or other dragons through what they call the spirit shores. Here, they can communicate not only with each other, but potentially even the dragons who are long dead, as the inherent massive amounts of investiture in dragons means they always produce a form of cognitive shadow, at least for a while, as their essence slowly fades into the great beyond. We've actually heard of the spirit shores before, because it's where one Hoid, more on him later, went after being disintegrated by retribution at the end of Wind and Truth. He went there to communicate with the dragons known as Frost and his unnamed sister to discuss the events of that book, and it's where he realized Dalinar Kholin is a storming genius. Speaking of Frost, let us discuss some specific dragon characters and what we learn about them in Isles of the Emberdark, starting with Frost. Frost is one of, if not the oldest characters in the entire Cosmere, and was present and potentially even participated in the Shattering of Adonalsium. We have never seen this character in person before, but we did read one of his letters in the Stormlight Archive, where he was extremely isolationist, not wanting to help Hoid at all. I think because of this, I had always assumed he was kind of a jerk, but Emberdark paints him in a much better hue. In his human form, Frost is a pale-skinned man with a long beard, and his dragon form is a shimmering white color, as both him and his niece are leucistic, which is a real thing that occurs in the real world. It's similar to albinism, but the key difference is that leucistic creatures still have some form of pigmentation, even if it's significantly lower than it probably should be. Emberdark shows us that Frost is actually very kind and empathetic to even mortals, but especially to his beloved niece, Illustrandra, aka Starling. We even learned that Frost wasn't always as isolationist as he now is, as he was willing to travel before and met the ancient trapper known as Kakuban, who he had great respect for. He's also missing. We don't know how much time exists between Stormlight Book 5 and Emberdark, but seeing as Frost's whereabouts were known to Hoid at the end of that book, the fact that a whole dragon as important as Frost could disappear is kind of a pretty big deal. Where would a man who has sought to avoid intervention for literal millennia suddenly go, and why? Now let's talk about Starling. Her story tells us two things. Actually, it tells us a lot more about her, but for that you can just read the book. She's one of the main protagonists, so I can't just reread the book to you. For greater Cosmere implications though, I feel the need to mention the fact that she is an orphan. Her parents died when she was young. Now dragons can die, but not much can actually kill them, which obviously begs the question, what killed Starling's parents? They would likely have to have died suddenly at the same time, which is pretty weird, and was probably a pretty big deal while we're at it. We don't know exactly how large the dragon population is, but given their supreme magical ability and extremely long lives, I'm imagining it isn't very large. 2 sudden deaths is probably a pretty big deal to it. Second, Starling's predicament shows us that the dragons have magical knowledge and skill that it will take humans well into the space age to even begin to surpass, as we see with the Scadrian Intensifier and its ability to break through dragon steel locks. Finally, I should mention Zixus and dragon society in general. We have known that dragons are basically worshipped, but Zixus shows us what I think we can assume most of them are kind of like. Zixus is very businesslike, caring primarily about furthering his political, monetary, and scientific goals. Starling took a stand against the Dragon Elders on moral convictions stemming from her desire to help mortals and was exiled from Yolen and locked in humanoid form for that betrayal. Zixus, meanwhile, appears to be on pretty good standing with the rest of the dragons. Zixus' primary contrast to them is just the fact that he likes to run businesses and governments, while they like to be treated as gods all the time. Dragons, on the whole, seem like huge jerks. Now that I've talked about dragons for too long, let us look at some of the other characters and what this book reveals about some of our favorite Cosmere heroes. Starting with our primary character, Sixth of the Dusk. This is sort of the whole plot, so I'll skip through some of the details, but the space age of the Cosmere still suffers from a lot of limitations, most notably around navigation. You can't simply punch a location into a computer and have it take you where you want to go. I'll admit, some of this space age stuff really goes over my head, but navigating the cognitive realm is very similar to old school orienteering if anyone here was ever in the Boy Scouts. You have to use landmarks and maps and such to find your way around, which makes finding anything that you don't already know where it is kind of difficult. There is an object known as the Grand Knell, which serves as a kind of North Star in the cognitive realm. The Knell was the spot where Odium killed Ambition, which left a massive wound on the spiritual realm, and is one of the reasons that getting on and off Trinity is pretty difficult. But it also radiates pulses that can be sensed by people with certain magical abilities such as Elementic Bronze or magical devices like Fabrios. Where Six of the Dust becomes important is with his Navigator abilities. He can sense the pulses of the Knell, but it's much more than just that. This wasn't necessarily super obvious in the book, but Six of the Dust's specific ability, which he has apparently taught to other trappers, is the ability to sense disturbances in the pulses. The thing that makes him important isn't just that he can sense the pulses and point to the Knell like a sentient compass, is the fact that he can tell where the pulses are being changed or disturbed or altered. He's not a compass, he's essentially a sonar. If you don't think the Cosmere space age was crowded enough, even more isolated people can be connected to the greater galactic community by using navigators to figure out where their subastrals might be in the cognitive realm. We should probably also mention Six of the Dust Burns. Apparently the ability to mask one's mental presence is a valuable ability. I'm not entirely sure how, as the only entities we ever see it hide people from are the very rare Nephilim or the creatures of his own homeworld of Dromanat. But I think there's a decent chance that AVRs can hide people from things like Awakening Life Sense, or potentially can even hide use of magical abilities like an Elementic Copper Cloud. Now that we've nailed that down, let's address the real elephant in the room, Hoid. Everyone's favorite rapscallion has gone through some changes by the Cosmere space age. Emberdark shows us that Hoid is one of the single most well-known people in the entire Cosmere, likely due to his penchant for interfering with everything and everyone. And as you might assume, his notoriety is far more infamy than fame. Hoid is a known outlaw in Silverlight and owes some large debts to people like Zixus, who is described as someone who would chase his enemies across the entire universe. Hoid probably doesn't care about that though, because torturing uppity people like Zixus is Hoid's favorite activity, but it's also likely that he's not very well liked by most other people. Assuming Roshar is still under retribution, he's likely going to get vaporized again if he ever makes himself known there, and is currently locked inside an unknown vault with a lengthy timer being the only thing that can open it. However, we still do learn a few more things about him. There are a handful of things of note, like his more paternal relationship with Starling, or his ability to break draconic law and visit the spirit shores. But let's get right to where I know we all want to go to. Hoid's wife. Yes! This sarcastic, abrasive jerkwagon somehow managed to tie the knot with someone. Let's quickly run down the potential bachelorettes. First is Queen Yasna Kholin, whom he did have an actual romantic relationship with, but they also broke up in Wind of Truth. There's a slight chance he could have married his friend companion Design, as that is the only person from the old days that he sees every single day. But I don't like to give the Silladin fans even a single inch. Moonlight, or Shy from the Emperor's Soul, is still around and has encountered him several times, and they seem to have a somewhat respectful relationship in a cat and mouse spy v spy sort of way. Finally, there's an above zero chance that he's married one of the shards. He's known all of them for millennia at this point, and some seem to tolerate him, which I am led to believe is the first step towards a romantic relationship.
As I recall, I think we both kinda liked it, and I said, well, that's the one thing we got.
In the same passage where Starling asks Hoyd for help for his wife, if at all possible, she also mentioned the, quote, twins. Now, technically speaking, there is no way of knowing for certain what Starling meant. However, there is something of an implication that occurs when you mention them in the same breath as Hoyd's wife. Did Hoyd have children?
That's a question.
There are 3 other pairs of twins that I can find in the Cosmere who it might be, though I'm baking me. Well, did he have kids? I don't know.
That's a question.
Theorn and K-Ice from Atlantis are twins, and bare minimum, K-Ice is still around as of the Lost Metal, so her brother might be as well. Shallan's brothers, Jushu and Wakim, are twins and still alive at the end of Stormlight 5, so they're also a maybe. Finally, Kaladin's childhood flame Laurel Rochon had a pair of twins described as solemn, so they're also an option. Again, I'm still predicting that Hoyd might have had kids, but those are all options as well.
I don't know. It's complicated.
And because once again my Cosmere scripts go way too long, let's rapid fire through the last few things that I want to mention. The Sleepless, which we have met before, have always said they are feared by many sapient species and peoples, but we have never actually seen them deal with persecution until now, as Chrysalis was nearly killed on sight by the Malwish, and is initially hated by Zitzi, who says that the Sleepless are slavers on the apparatus.
Everyone's doing their part. Are you?
Edlin, the Dynamics Arcanist, which is definitely the job that I would have if I were in the Cosmere, tells us a few things of note about the world. For starters, he is from a rarely mentioned world called Vax, which Brandon refuses to tell us more about. I shouldn't have to tell you that this likely means it will be very important to the Cosmere. Ed is also a Pathian, which means Sazed is likely still around. Ed also mentions that he knows Huyo, which means that at least one member of Bridge 4 is still alive and kicking, which I'm sure Captain Kaladin would be pleased to know. Ed also mentions that no one knows where Virtuosity is these days, which means that her death is possibly unknown to the general populace.
She died of pneumonia whilst... Oh, you were away.
And with that, that is everything that I found in Isles of the Emberdark that might have greater Cosmere significance. In the style of the Cosmere, there are likely countless untold things that I missed in my research, so if you noticed anything else, please let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, bye!